Metropolitan Education would like to welcome our esteemed guests. We are gathered here today for the second edition of DME's Author Talk. Not taking much time, I would now like to introduce our guests. Events and Communication Cell, DME, is proud to present an author talk moderated by Mr. Mohit Gupta, co-founder of Citybook Leaders, on Tata's leadership experiment, the story of the Tata Administrative Service, a book that has been crafted by our guests today and former Tata Administrative Service officers, Mr. Mukund Rajan and Ms. Sonu Bhasin. Ms. Sonu Bhasin is one of the early women professionals in the corporate world. She has led various businesses in senior leadership positions during her career, including when she was a part of the Tata Administrative Service or TAS, ING Bearings, Axis Bank, Yes Bank and Tata Capital Limited. Ms. Bhasin is an independent director on boards of well-known and reputed domestic and multinational companies. As part of her work now, she focuses on family businesses and is founder of FAB, that is Family and Business. She's a family business historian, a business author, and the editor-in-chief of the Families and Business magazine. She has been named one of the global 100 most influential individuals for family enterprises in 2020. Ms. Bhasin has a BSc Honours degree in Mathematics from St. Stephen's, Delhi University, and an MBA from the Faculty of Management Studies, Delhi University. Welcome, ma'am. Dr. Mukund Rajan chairs a pioneering investment firm focused on catalyzing environment, social and governance improvements. Previously, in 23 years career with India's largest corporate house, the Tata Group, he served as the group's first brand custodian, chief ethics officer, chairman of Tata Global Sustainability Council, and member of the Group Executive Council. A graduate from IIT Delhi, Dr. Rajan completed a doctorate in international relations on a Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford University. I welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
I also welcome our esteemed dignitaries, Dr. Ravikant Swamy. Sir is the director at Delhi Metropolitan Education. I also would like to welcome the Dean of Law School, Dr. Rashmi Khurana Nagpal. Welcome, ma'am. I would also like to welcome Dr. Purva Ranjan, who is the head at DME Management School. Welcome, ma'am. Now, moving ahead to Tata's leadership experiment. In the mid-1950s, J.R.E. Tata envisioned the creation of an exclusive management cadre for the Tata Group, christened as the Tata Administrative Service. His vision was to create future leaders who would perpetuate the Tata values such as integrity, excellence, unity, and responsibility throughout the group. At the core of these values was the agenda of nation building. Understanding fully well that leadership development is a dynamic phenomenon and continues to change over time, J.R.D. Tata was looking at leaders who would be constantly groomed for roles across Tata companies. What led to TAS becoming a natural choice amongst aspirants over the IAS, which at any point of time would give them the assurance of a stable government. How did the TAS fare with the creation of leaders? Who were some of the brightest leaders that the TAS created? Where is TAS today and how does the future look? These are the questions that the authors of this book had set up on to find answers to. Based on an extensive research and detailed interviews with former and current TAS officers, the book presents a fascinating account of an ambitious leadership experiment. I am, for one, very glad to be a part of this author talk. I would now like to invite Dr. Ravikant Swamy to felicitate our first guest, respected Ms. Sonu Bhasin ma'am, with a token of remembrance. felicitate our second guest, respected Mr. Mukund Rajan, with a token of remembrance. I would finally like to invite Dr. Purva Ranjan ma'am to please felicitate our next guest, respected Mr. Mohit Gupta sir, with a token of remembrance. I would now request Mohit Gupta sir to please take the stage and steer the author talk with Ms. Bhasin and Dr. Rajan as we delightfully wait to hear it straight from the authors. Sir.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It was a great introduction. Well, setting up the context. और अब तो gift भी मिल गए. So और क्या चाहिए? It's always good to be in DMing everyone, especially with the enthusiasm of building curious readers, as ma'am said. It's good to know that your exams have just gone over, or possibly few of you would be in between your exams, so you must be wondering how will this add value to you. And many of you must be thinking, अभी तक तो IAS ही सुना था, आज एक टेस्ट भी आ गया. But इस book को पढ़ने के बाद मुझे लगा कि मोदी Administrative Services भी होता था. Of course, not from the present times, but way back. So, though many times I feel either IAS will become Modi Administrative Services now, but the inspiration might be from somewhere else. So that's the connection between history and the present times. It's always there. And I myself am a very curious person, so I always ask questions before I get to read anything. And when I was reading this book came to me almost, I think, a couple of months, or I think last year. And I've read almost all books by Sonu and all the previous books. And in fact, his dissertation, I've read Mukund's dissertation also, which is on environment, and it's a remarkable dissertation. So, out of my curiosity, I was wondering, why is it so that Tatas every time have to look for their successor? And it's always a matter of debate, even during the times of JRD while I was in school, but it used to be the headline. And especially during the Ratan Tata's time as well, who will be the successor? But why is it so that the Parsis have this tradition of not marrying outside their own community? Now there's also a lesson to it, and the lesson is very simple. It's a promise that they gave way back in 8th century. And I'll start this session with that promise. And what is that story? So the story is about a king named as Jida Rana. And when this religious war was happening in Persia, many of these Zoroastrians came knowing that India is a great place. There are many such kings who give asylum to a lot of people, and with a lot of respect and dignity. So one of this Zoroastrian group came to Jida Rana in the area of Kutch, which is towards Gujarat, and they said, "Sir, we would like to be part of this land. Give us the space, give us the place. We would love to be here." I said, "Okay," and then he placed a glass full of milk. दूध से भरा हुआ एक ग्लास सामने रख दिया और कहा, "देखिए भाई साहब, ऐसा है कि यहाँ तो जगह ही नहीं है, हम तो ऑलरेडी बहुत सेटिस्फाइड हैं और बिल्कुल हमारी कंडीशन इस दूध के ग्लास जैसी है." So what they did next, the Zoroastrian priest, one of the Zoroastrian priests who had come, उसने चीनी की एक चम्मच उठाई और उस ग्लास में डाल दी और उसे खोल दिया. So he said, "Sir, if you are the glass of milk, we'll work like sugar for you, and we'll add value into whatever you do." So the Jida Rana, the king, said, "Okay, great. अगर आप ऐसा कर रहे हैं तो बहुत अच्छी बात है, लेकिन मेरी कुछ शर्तें हैं जो आपको आज नहीं, अब हमेशा माननी होंगी, हमेशा." All the Zoroastrians said, "Okay, what are your conditions?" Sort of many conditions that you will wear the ethnic dresses here, you will wear saris here, you will live by the standards here. One of the conditions was you will not marry anyone outside your community, especially from our community. Imagine, that promise has been kept even today. And what I'm narrating you is from 8th century. That promise is intact. And that's why the emergence of Tata Administrative Services happened when JRD realized that we always marry within our community and we don't have enough people to manage it further. So they needed professionals, they needed people who can adopt the Tata values, the business values, to take it as their own company. Now that's a great lesson. One is to keeping the promise for ages and ages and decades, centuries. The other one is very interesting is how you also look in the future. How do you plan for the future? मुझसे आज कोई बोले कि अगले एक साल बाद क्या करोगे तो पता नहीं होता. But imagine somebody has planned, JRD planned it in a way, in the most professional way. There's a genesis of TAS, which is the Tata Administrative Service. That's how the book starts. And I think what I have given you the story is beyond the book, which is before the TAS of the Parsis and all this community work. And both of them have done a recovery, all three of them in fact. And I was fortunate enough to not only know Bharat because of this book, but because of his mother's book, which is on Kashmir. And I was with Bharat 3-4 days ago in the BIMTech campus. And it's a fascinating book, and you have to read it with that lens of curiosity. That every story that they've given, including the story where Ratan Tata used to put the plastic green snakes, right, in the boardrooms, just to have a good laugh. And many other such interesting stories which you can relate in your daily lives and what you can learn from them. And to do that, what we will do today is we will listen to these two TAS officers, the TAS 1995 Mukund and TAS 1986. That's how they 87, sorry. So that's the IES. IES is also very clear about their cadre. I'm an 87 cadre, don't call me 86. Yes. And so the IES gives the specific seniority, whether he's under secretary, joint secretary, or other secretary. But yes, I think this is what happens when you get into a tribe. So if you say I'm a DME 2022, and by mistake somebody is a DME 2021, so I'm sure you will have the same pride. So we'll start this discussion and we will keep it very interactive. So if you have any question right now, Abhi, if you have any question, कि भाई क्यों पूछ रहे हो, क्या बताने वाले हो, कैसे होगा, जो भी कब क्यों कहाँ कैसे, any of your curious questions, you can start right now. But I have also some set of questions, some from you, and they would definitely provide the answers and be happy to say to your curiosity. Anyone at this point of time, anything that comes into your mind? ये मत पूछना फिर एग्जाम के रिजल्ट्स कब आने वाले हैं वो शायद नहीं बता पाएंगे manage yes we'll do that
okay so it's a great opportunity today we have two great personalities in our college so my question goes to Rajan sir sir this is pertaining to your position which you have held chief ethical officer with the Tatas. And my question is something which is maybe a common thread in this book. Look, we live in a world. We live in a world where I can quote this dialogue from the TV serial Swabhiman. कुछ झूठ सच से भी ज़्यादा पवित्र होते हैं. And in such a world, how do you define ethics?
So the question is, how do you define ethics? You'll find lots of explanations of what ethics can be or should be. People will link it to values, people will link it to morals. But ultimately, I think it's about conduct, and that which shapes conduct even when nobody is watching. I think for me that is the biggest indicator. You may have laws, compliance, rules, regulations, where people are constantly testing you and asking you to offer evidence that you have complied. But ethics goes a step further, goes to consciousness. That even if you could potentially get away with breaking a law and nobody would notice it, are you still going to conduct yourself in a way that is seen to be proper? And a good sort of trivial example of that is it's late night, nobody on the roads, there's a red light, there are no CCTV cameras, you drive through, because you're in a hurry to get home, or because of your consciousness you stop, on the off chance that maybe somebody shows up and is going to cross the road and you obey the law, even though nobody's watching, nobody's testing you. So for me, that is really what ethics is about. And in the Indian corporate world, the Tata context, I think the question has always been, do you abide by the rules and regulations, even when they seem to be sometimes absurd or ridiculous? And I've given an illustration in the book, for instance, on the civil aviation policy, which was deliberately designed to keep Tatas out of civil aviation at a time when we were planning a joint venture at the central government's behest with Singapore Airlines in the early 1990s. So there are a number of corporates, I think, which would have found ways to get the rules then modified, or even started working towards actions on the assumption that they would succeed. But with Tata's, I think when it was clear that the rule didn't permit it, we didn't do it. So you'll see that thread running constantly. So what do you do in an environment when a lot of others tend to take shortcuts or break the law because they think nobody's watching? So that is really when you start getting described as an ethical person or ethical organization.
Fantastic. So that doesn't mean that when your invigilator or Shalini ma'am is not in the class, you can actually see in others' copy. Yeah, iska sawab to bata de, right? That will be actually ethics. Great. So on the note of ethics, because that sets the absolute context for whatever we do as professionals. तो जब आप job में जाएंगे, आप अपना business करेंगे. So ethics will actually form the base. So with that note, I'll start. And what we can do, we can have 3 minutes each, and give us something, the background of TES. What is TES? Because possibly many of us would not know what exactly TES is. And what's the context? How it was built? Take some time and give a brief intro of TES.
How many of you actually had heard about TAS, Tata Administrative Service, before you were invited here? Some of you. And for the others, you have no idea what TAS is, right? But you have an idea what IAS is, right? You know what the IAS is. So IAS is the Indian Administrative Service. So the TAS is the Tata Administrative Service. And part of the reason why it was formed, etc., I think Mohit ne shuru kara tha. But you know, the Tatas, when JRD took over, and he took over the chairmanship of the Tata Group, which was one of the largest even at that time, he was, I think, just a young boy, late 20s, early 30s, I think, 30, yeah, early 30s. And he wasn't a postgraduate. He hadn't studied very much. He was living in France. He was conscripted into the army, etc. So he realized that if he had to build his empire, his business group, he needed talented professionals to take it forward. Now, in the 30s, 40s, there were no management institutes, there were no institutes like DME where young children came in, studied, and then passed out as future leaders. So you started either working, what we say, you rise from the ranks, you start working at the lowest level, then you steadily start learning and then start moving up. But JRD had a vision that went beyond all of this. And he realized that just because you study a particular kind of stream doesn't make you a better leader, capable of leading businesses. You could be a geologist and you could be a leader, you could have studied physics and become a leader, or you could have studied management and become a leader. So he put together a small team and said that we need to look for leaders, not managers. We need to look for leaders who we can groom, who will work with us, and who can then take on senior leadership positions in the Tata Group. So that actually very practically was the genesis. The other reason was, as Mohit said, RCs do not have many children, and I think that also must have been there at the back of his mind. But he actually wanted to identify, recruit, groom, and give opportunities to young people who could then stay on in the group and become future leaders. So, very simply put, this was the genesis. And why administrative service? Because when it started, in India we had a managing agency system, and the managing agency system worked something like this, that there was an agency, a managing agency, who may have had just 4%, 5%, very small stake in a business, but would be in charge of managing the business and earn a commission out of it. So, because at that time there was the managing system, and managing agencies had to be administered, I think that was the reason why it was called the administrative service and not a managing service. Unless, Mukund has spent far more number of years. I spent 13 years in the Tatas, he spent 23 years, so he may know more about it than I do, but that was the genesis.
A couple of points. One, of course, at the time that TRD envisioned Tata Administrative Service, of course, the IAS was a very interesting role model, because the best professionals, just before independence, but by the time we were talking about the TAS, the IAS had already been created. So there was a sense that the IAS had already become, in a fairly protectionist, socialist kind of environment in India, a dream sort of community that many young professionals wanted to be part of. And similarly, in the corporate world, equivalent, I guess, somebody must have thought would be the Tata Administrative Service. Just to add to what Sonu said, I think two interesting elements about the TAs. A lot of premium on learning by doing, and therefore a lot of encouragement of TS officers to start their career perhaps at one Tata company, but then very quickly to move across companies and gain experience. So you could spend a few years in the hospitality industry, work with Taj Hotels, then you could move to Tata Motors and learn on the trucking industry, very different works, and then potentially end up spending a few years in Tata Tea, managing tea plantations. And the idea was, as you get that experience, you will also carry the Tata values from company to company, and as you become quite senior, you will either run one of those Tata flagship companies, or particularly after the 1990s when the environment started getting liberalized and opened up, and many new Tata enterprises were formed, you could then be sent to launch new businesses in the digital space, in retail, in financial services and so on. So the idea was create a cadre of really smart managers who could both run your established enterprises and ensure that the Tata values were carried forward, or help to set up new businesses. So that's broadly the perspective with which the TS was to be established.
Anything that you would like to ask on the TAS as a formation? Anything? Anyone? There's no specific mandate that you ask a question. We are just taking clarification. But yes, yes.
So how can we recruit task officers? How do we do this? How can you become? Yes, what are the bases that a task officer is recruiting?
Now, once they pass out. When are you passing out?
2029.
2025 में वो TAS कैसे मिलेगा?
So there has been, I think, for a couple of decades now, process that the TAS adopts, where they have limited their visits to different institutions. For several years, they focused only on the Indian Institute's management, the IIMs. Then they expanded that and started visiting not just some of the newer IIMs that indicate, but also some of the other institutions on management education. So I think you'll have to watch very carefully to see whether you're able to attract them to institutions like DAB. And that, as of now, tends to be the protocol they've been following. So go to specific campuses and then make on-campus offers. There was a time, though, before the early 2000s period, and certainly when the TAS started, when they were very open to receiving all kinds of applications. In the early years of the TAS, many of the candidates were actually trained overseas. As Sonu mentioned, India didn't have a large number of management institutions at that point of time. Many of the IIMs only came up later. So the early batches of the TAS, we talk about that in the book, many of them were from Oxford, Cambridge, trained overseas, and then came back to India. Likewise, in my case, I went to IIT Delhi, then I went to Oxford, and I came back and interviewed at the TAS. So they had a special intake in my year, which is 1994, for students from other institutions and from overseas. But they haven't sort of gone back to that model because I think they found that they've had so many applicants, they haven't necessarily need to look beyond probably the 15 or 20 institutions that currently they focus on. But it's been a running debate that are you losing out on the talent pool? And one of the important areas where we've, in our book, also advised that the TAs should be more open is foreign talent. Tatas today are a very multinational organization. We have hundreds of thousands of employees working in other countries. If the TAs has to remain relevant, and relevant also in terms of leadership in geographies outside India, you need to have a TAS construct that includes a number of foreign nationals. There were some experiments that were tried 10, 15, 20 years back to offer sabbaticals, to offer internships to people from some of the foreign universities. Harvard, I remember we had an arrangement at one point in time. We had students from China under something that we call the Tata China Management Program. But a lot of that has been discontinued. So I suspect it will continue to be a debate, but right now I think there's a focus on a few designated institutions in India. That list should be available on the website.
You can't apply. I mean, earlier you could apply to the secretariat, now you can't. You only have to wait for them to come.
But
Yeah, but worth finding out if you can apply, because people who work in the Tatas can apply.
That's a separate
So,
defined
yeah.
group for people with
So if they don't come to your institute and you do want to work and have a shot at the TAS, find a job in any Tata company and then apply as a Tata employee.
Now I'll tell you a very interesting thing. How can you find a job in Tata? But then you have to read a book which is called.
Tata's leadership experience.
No. Yes, of course. This too definitely you read because you understand the task. And post that, you should read a book which is called I Came Upon a Lighthouse by Shantanu Naidu. And you should search Shantanu, right? Mukund maybe will tell you later. And how he met Ratan Tata because of his passion towards pets and saving pets. I think that's what is also mentioned in the book. In the task process, the initial years, especially when JRD used to interview, used to ask, what are your interest areas? So somebody used to mention that I'm interested in Bollywood. Then the discussion used to go towards Bollywood. That gives a very clear signal. Wherever you are from, whatever you are, but whatever you do it so diligently that anybody gets interested in you. So that's the way, possibly that's a better route for you to pick up tonight. Okay. So now, on the lines of why you might be inspired to reach to Tatas, it's very important to know why we have Tata in every part of our life. Every part of life. कहते हैं हमने तो नमक भी टाटा का खाया है और जिसका नमक खाओ उसका हक जरूर अदा करो. So from that standpoint, we have Tata in everything that we do. Possibly you would have taken a Tata bus while coming to your campus. You would have come in your Tata car, or a cab possibly, or anything. Possibly you would have used a Tata soap somewhere, or I think the soaps are not there, the Tonka has gone out, but many other such businesses that touch your life every day, every minute, even they are not, even if the brand is not present in the front. But what are those startup values? That's very important to understand for you all as a future professionals, which Sonu and Mukund can tell. What are those value systems that the TAS used to see in their budding times when they were there inside the TAS, and what's that process? So Mukund and Sonu, what are those value systems? Because you have even lived in Ratan Tata's house, right? That same apartment where Ratan used to live. And you have been the longest serving heir to Ratan Tata. You have seen close quarters. And Sonu, with your kind of background, with not only Tatas, but other family managed businesses and the values that they drive, that they've become businesses of scale and of much of ethics as well. What are those values that, so imagine if I'm also a student here for this moment, what can we take back as those important values? Possibly those 3 values from both of you would be of immense help.
So, I think the one lesson that I have learned during my stay at the Tatas, and the TS I've said publicly before was the best thing that happened to me professionally, because like a child learns the values from his or her parents, any young professional learns professional values from their first job. And I was fortunate that I was picked up by the TAS. And the one lesson that has stayed with me is that there is only one way to run a business, one way to do business, which is the right way. And that right way encompasses all the values. And we were not taught कि ये right way है, ये wrong way है, ऐसा करना चाहिए, ऐसा नहीं करना चाहिए. We just were given an opportunity to observe the senior leaders of the Tata Group. And as TS officers, we were very, very fortunate that we had very easy access to some of the top names of the Tata Group. And when you work with them, you work in their office, you see them interact with people, you see them taking decisions, I think you just learn from that. So the one value that I have carried is there is only one way to do the business, which is the right. Mukund was the chief ethics officer, custodian of the brand, which espouses all the values. So he can tell you more about this.
The values, there are 5 values that we talked about, and there are descriptors of these: so integrity, pioneering, unity, responsibility, and excellence. And each of them has a connotation, but I'll link it to what Sonu just said, which is the right way of conducting yourself, whatever be the circumstances, situation. Ultimately, if there is a, a somewhat standardized common template which most startup leaders would use in reacting to situations, then you know that you've created a culture, you've created a value system that most people in the Tatas would abide by. And I think that is what the TA is attempting to do with a great measure of success. The one other element in conduct which I talked about, which I think all of us experienced, and Sonu just mentioned that, the accessibility and humility of top leadership in Tatas. It's something quite rare actually in the business world. Anybody could, if they spotted Ratan Tata, JRD at an airport, go up and talk to them. These are people, the famous stories of both of them carrying their own bags, standing in line. JRD chairing in line when he was chairman of the airline. So these are not people who felt or acted as if they were entitled to better treatment than other people. Very down to earth, very grounded. Humility was very obvious. And I've seen that at successive Tata Chairman. I worked very closely also with Cyrus Mistry. And again, very grounded, very humble. So these are all talented people who had obviously great skills as leaders, huge amount of charisma, but never misused or abused their stature with common people. And at the heart of their business operations always felt a strong commitment to giving back to the community, giving back to society. And a lot of that is actually built in the Tata organizational structure. So at the level of the holding company, Tata Sons, the group is actually 66% owned by charities, the Tata charities. And I think that gives a very different connotation to why in the Tatas you're involved in business, why you're trying to create profit, because a substantial chunk of that profit goes back to charities and in turn gets committed to social causes. The very few capitalist organizations in the world where you can feel that the harder you work, the more surplus you generate, the more good work will happen in society for common people, for the average communities. And I think that has been one of the hallmarks of the Tatas and the Tata values.
Actually, let me add to this. All of you would have seen the lists that come out periodically, or have been coming out, 100 top rich men in the people in India. You would not have seen Ratan Tata's name on it, even when he was the chairman of the largest business conglomerate in India. He wasn't one of the 100 richest people in the country. And so what Mukund was saying, that when you're working for the Tatas, all the money that gets generated actually goes back towards helping other people, not to add to the wealth of certain individuals. And that is a different mindset altogether. So I remember that, and I suspect it's true for you, when I started working in the Tatas, it was the most coveted job on the campus. I mean, the PAS was like literally, everybody would give their arm and a leg to be able to join the TAS. So I got the most coveted job. I was the lowest paid in my batch, but it didn't matter. You don't stay on and work in the Tatas because they pay you more. You work in the group because the values and the work that you do resonates. And if you see a Ratan Tata or a JRD standing in a line to check out of a hotel or in the, carrying their own bags, down the line you can't be seen breaking the queue to say, don't you know who I am? So those values actually then percolate down by observation. JRD and Ratan Tata didn't make us sit in a classroom and say, you should not, ask somebody to carry a bag. They didn't need to, we just saw them.
Especially for the people in Delhi, tu janta nahi hai main kaun hu.
Actually, that's an interesting story. So, there was, I don't know how many of you have heard of Rusi Modi, the ex-head of Tata Steel, Tisco. So, Bombay House is on a street called Homi Modi Street, who was Rusi Modi's father and also, well-known person. So the story goes that Rusi Modi came to Bombay House one day and he was driving himself and he couldn't find parking, so he just parked somewhere in the middle of the road and got out. And there was the Bombay police wala who came running up and said, "Aap yahan pe nahi park kar sakte ho." So he said, "Main karunga, main Bombay House ja raha hu." So he said, "Kya tumhare baap ki sadak hai?" So he took him by the hand to the end of the road where there was written Homi Modi Street. He said, "Ha, mere baap ki sadak hai."
So this question is specifically on behalf of faculty, right? Because we have a lot of faculty members also present. And this also shows the learning curve of the institution where faculty is sitting with the students to learn and is equally curious on the subject. So imagine the faculty has to create a similar framework of tasks. So what all things will the faculty do so that it looks like as if there is a prototype of task being formed with the students or the batches coming in? If there's anything that you would like to shed your light on. In the formation of the task, imagine if you have to create a prototype. Faculty, you please say if this is logical or not, if you would like to do that. Can put your thoughts.
Okay, so this actually draws from some of the conclusions in our book. I think the first thing when you have any kind of program is how do you actually select for that program. So if you wanted to meet a certain standard, a certain level in terms of
preparation and then hopefully outcomes. A lot rides on how you select people to participate in that. And I think in the TAs, they did a pretty good job of it. There was a fairly detailed process, particularly in the early decades, based on first receiving applications from really smart students, and then spending 2-3 days with them, as you just heard from Mohit, understanding their interests and passions and exploring how deeply they'd already invested time and effort in getting to grips with those subjects. That gives you a sense then of how committed these people could be. And it didn't matter whether it was, as he said, Bollywood or bringing up dogs or interest in jazz. We've talked about all of that in the book. But what mattered was, were you genuinely and authentically interested in those spaces? And did you spend enough time to learn? So were you curious? Is there continuous learning embedded in your personality and profile? So I think a lot rides on the orientation of the people you select. And if you get that wrong, then already you're setting yourself up potentially for failure. Having then made the selection, in the TAs we felt that by and large the selections were fantastic. But where then the Tatas missed out in a number of cases was continued investment. So you can't say, I'm going to create this fantastic program, I'm going to have a very high bar for people to cross to get in, and then after that, leave them alone. It doesn't work that way. You have to continuously invest in preparing them for the future. They also have to show, obviously, some amount of initiative, and many of them do. But it can't entirely be left only to the people, because sometimes they don't have the exposure. In India, for instance, I dare say many people even today have relatively limited exposure to some of the best techniques, curricula, methodologies that are available in foreign universities. And unless somebody from a foreign university came and told you that this is in vogue now, you wouldn't even know. So I think there is a lot of emphasis that you need to create in these programs on exposure, on preparing people to do even better, and to keep elevating the standard. So those are at least two things that I would call out: the intake, and then the continuous learning and investment in the people. And then, of course, you need to expose them to risky situations and see how they perform. And there has to be some process of exclusion or elimination if they don't continue to perform well. Because the worst thing that can hurt the reputation of a flagship program is if it becomes a mixed bag. There are some great people, there are lots of mediocre people, then that reputation is lost. I think the TAs, there's a lot of that happened automatically. People either left of their own volition or were eventually sort of weeded out. So I think you do need to have all of that working for you if you want to have a high-class program, whichever the organization may be. Sonu, would I?
All I want to say is that if you're creating a program like that, just focus on the attitude of people. Because one thing that I learned as part of TS, and especially my first year probation, during the probationary year, we had to work with 5 different data companies and be part of some hands-on live projects. So one thing that I learned was that technical knowledge can be acquired in relatively short time. But the attitude is something that is kind of hardwired into the brain. And people who succeed don't do that because of what they know, but because of their attitude. So if you're creating a program, or if you're looking for people, you're looking for leaders, whatever way, focus on getting people with the right attitude.
True. So what we will do now is a quick rapid fire round. And 3 to you and 2 to you. And I'm sure, and you will take a couple of seconds to answer. Right? You will not get a chance to think much about it, but that's how the attitude is hardwired. So I'll have 3 to Mukund, 3 to you, and possibly 4 to you. Just to have the diversity and views and things. So Mukund, we start now. Okay, Mukund, sir. MBA or common sense?
Common sense.
There's a story about the common sense or a discussion that he had with Ratan Tata. That's why this MBA or common sense.
Shall I narrate that story?
Yes.
So, uh, I was called in by Ratan Tata for a meeting before he actually offered me the role of executive assistant to him. And when I met him, I thought it fair to tell him that Mr. Tata, I've done several degrees. I have a BTech, I have a MPhil, and I have a doctorate, but I don't have a management degree. I hope that is not an issue for you, because if it is, then I need to tell you right now, I don't have an MBA. And he said, I don't think you need an MBA to succeed in the world of business. All you need is good common sense. So that's the context of this question.
The second one, Mukund, is reading about Dhiro Bhai or watching the movie Guru?
That's a tough one.
Especially to a young crowd.
Honestly, I haven't read anything about, well actually I have, that's, it would be wrong to say. I read the Amish book, Polyester Prince, which was banned for a period of time, and I think it got restored. I learned a fair bit from that, but the movie was, though it was not supposedly necessarily only about him, but I think it's possible to learn from both, so both are worth doing.
That's where your MPhil comes in, your DPhil comes in picture, yeah. The third one, highest salary in a startup or an entry-level job in any Tata or Tata-like company?
Now my view is startup. Take the risk, because when you're young, you have the energy, you have the dynamism, you have the learning. You can always go back into a state-old company and work for it for the next 40 years after that. But so many opportunities today, startup.
Fantastic. So, comes to you now. A startup while in college, so they should start a startup while in college or should do a job for 3 years?
Again, it depends on the attitude. Because if you have the drive in you, start as soon as you can. But if, see, not everybody is an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is also an attitude, a state of mind. So if you are an entrepreneur, start at the soonest. Make as many mistakes as you can, because that's the only way to learn. But if you are not an entrepreneur, there is nothing to be ashamed of. Be good at whatever you do.
Okay. So, an American job or a social purpose business or a job in tier 2 city of India?
They can be together, no? You can work for an American company and still be in tier 2.
Possibly a good foundation that will work.
Good foundation. And anyway, any job that you do, you can always make a difference in the lives of others.
I'm wondering whose side fire is. It's coming back to me. Okay. The other one, a teacher reading a book or a teacher taking a selfie? Whom would you prefer as a student?
If I were a teacher or my teacher?
A student, as a student.
A teacher reading a book or teacher taking a selfie?
Whom would you go with?
Teacher taking a selfie.
Oh my Now that shows the attitude, right? Always young at heart, and the preferences and choices are very clear. It's fantastic. Okay, the last one for you, Sonu. A job in Delhi or in Mumbai to start?
To start with, a job in Bombay, call it Mumbai. Bombay, and I see a lot of women here. Bombay is much easier to work for women, safer also at night, and it's safe because there are always people around. In Delhi, you will have many stretches of roads where you won't see a soul. Bombay, you can, I mean, it's difficult not to find people, so you're safer. Also, I mean, there's no professionalism in Bombay. So if you are getting your work ethics, grounding, Bombay is a great place. Then come back to Delhi.
Yeah, once you set your ground. Okay, great. So with this, some of the students who have read the book earlier or others as well, in case you
Or they can ask about anything.
Anything that you feel like, please.
Wanted to know the story behind that how this book got conceptualized. Wanted to know that story behind that how this book got conceptualized.
Okay, so we have a very active ex-TS officers group. And during the pandemic, a lot of conversation used to happen on the WhatsApp group. And people used to share stories, people used to talk of anecdotes, people used to talk of experiences. And you know, the one thing that is common amongst all TS officers, especially the ex-TS officers, is that we are very passionate about TS, we have very fond memories of TS. So somebody on the group suggested that, you know, there should be a book, and that's how the conversation got started. And then Bharat, Mukund and I got roped in. I think we volunteered, we were bullied, I don't remember, but we got roped in, and the three of us, and we didn't meet even once, three of us, because we were in different cities. Bharat is in Pune, Mukund is in Bombay, I'm in Delhi. Everything was done on the phone, and we felt that it was a testimony to the selection process of the TS, that through the writing of the book, we had disagreements, we didn't agree with each other, but we are still friends.
Some context, and I like to read news as a legal student. So I recently read that some UK parliaments actually hold a meeting to not close certain Tata companies so that they can hold employment there. And we were discussing the issue of employment of foreign national employees. So my question is that instead of focusing on the foreign employees, we have like brain drain from India. The education and the students from India who go to foreign and settle there and offer their services to other companies. So shouldn't be there a program to trap that brain drain and those students or those professionals back into our Indian companies and use their talents and get them back to nation?
They should. Short answer is yes. I think some companies have tried doing things. In Tata's as well, we were actually focused on trying to attract some of the top talent. Some of it, by the way, was talent which came back to India with multinationals and then was brought into Tata. So just to give you one illustration, a few years back when Cyrus in fact was the chairman, a gentleman called Gopi Chand Katragada, who was heading the General Electric Center of Excellence in Bangalore, was brought in as the Chief Technology Officer for the Tata Group with a mandate to focus on new businesses and new technologies that Tata should be looking at, leveraging some of his foreign experience and his experience in General Electric company. So yes, that has been part of, I think, the approach in many Tata companies. In Tata Steel, for instance, 25 years back, the company became part of a program with Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, under something that they call the Industrial Liaison Program, to try and access best practices in steel making, access best practices in various domains of management as well, including supply chain management. So I think many of our companies have been tracking developments, trying to work with institutions, being part of networks, and trying to attract talent back. Could more be done? Absolutely. One of the issues I think which typically comes up though with many of these professionals who are reasonably well settled in overseas markets is the compensation. In some cases also, issues around the families and so on. So if they're Indians who've gone overseas, once they've spent 10, 15 years, the kids are growing up there. If they made a few visits to India, they have a sense that maybe, for whatever reason, the schooling system is different, the kids might have problems. Increases the reluctance to return. And then compensation obviously plays a role. If you're earning a 7-digit salary in the US, then it becomes a little hard to compensate those people adequately while still maintaining the balance with your Indian professionals who spent a lifetime with your organization in India itself. So those can be challenges, but certainly can be overcome, particularly if it's the kind of talent that can be transformative for some of your businesses. And as I mentioned, Dr. Katragada was one example where we did make that call and did do something a little different.
So thank you, sir. One more follow-up question, if I may. So, sir, what do you think, in your point of view, are the lacking of Indian system of education? What we are lacking? And one rather complicated question: do you think reservation actually plays a role in this brain drain concept? Like the top talents of the India are not getting opportunity because of reservation in government sector, or they are getting frustrated with the system that in India already exists. So, what role does that play, and how that can be overcome?
So one question is a reservation. The question before was, what was the first question? Is there anything that is lacking? So, I think a lot has changed in the last 30 years for me personally, from what I see. I think there are now many educational institutions which are being much more I guess much greater focus on allowing students to discover their talents, to understand what kind of personality they have, to explore different facets of their own individuality. 30 years back, certainly in my case, I was at IIT, starting with the gender distribution, we had 3 girls and 400 boys. So it was a very imbalanced kind of environment in which you were learning about technology. There was a huge focus, certainly in the BTech program, on really technology and number-driven stuff. Very little focus on social issues, social sciences. They accounted for a very small part of your credits. When I went to Oxford, it was a breath of fresh air because there I was anyway looking at social sciences. I was studying international relations, political science, and a huge focus on debate and argumentation. It taught you to explore the world, come up with ideas and concepts and test them with your tutor, test them in your exams. And if you had originality with some amount of evidence to back that, you'd get the highest scores. In India at that time, on the other hand, it was all about maxing your scores by just learning by rote and reproducing what you thought the teacher wanted. Whereas overseas, it was all about exploring your own self and being able to express and reflect that sensibly. But I think a lot has changed in India, so I don't think it would be fair for me to comment today on whether that is a big acne in many of the Indian programs. And certainly the gender distribution in this room suggests that on some issues there's been a huge sea change. On your point about reservation, and I'll hand to Sonu after this, she may have other thoughts. On reservation, I think where is it coming from? This is the equivalent of affirmative action programs. You have them in many countries. India is not the only one. The US has a number of programs to empower, to equip, for instance, people from the Black community, the African American community, and so on. So it's not something that's unusual. And particularly given our stage of development, and given the kind of issues we've had in our society, starting with the caste system and so on, there are sections of society that have felt excluded for the right reasons. They have been excluded. Even today, if you look at the top elements, then you pick anything. You look at parliament, you look at the judiciary, you look at the civil services, somebody even did an analysis of Indian cricket team. You find that representation of the underprivileged communities has been dramatically lower than even their share of the population. So that's where reservation comes from, the need to provide opportunities so that they can quickly improve or get opportunities to succeed like everyone else, and hopefully then pull many other members of their communities along with them. At the time of independence, there was a feeling that a lot of these reservation programs would be there for a generation, and then eventually the need for it would vanish. But unfortunately, development in India has not attained the kind of pace which would allow that to happen. Even today, there are probably 1 million young people at a minimum coming to the workforce every month, 12 to 15 million every year. There aren't enough jobs being created. So forget about the underprivileged communities, even the privileged communities are going to see economic stress if enough jobs are not created. So there will be problems going forward as well. There will be challenges. Hopefully all of you will find innovative ways to solve. The government itself cannot provide jobs to everyone. I mean, you cannot have the whole population working for the government. You do need a successful private sector. You need successful startups, which is why one is so bullish on entrepreneurialism in this country. That has to be a big part of the focus in academic institutions. If you can do that, maybe through individual action, there will be many more jobs that you can absorb the number of young people coming to society. But in government, I think, given the way our society is constructed, I don't see reservation vanishing in a hurry, and there's a reason why it was created in the the first place. So I think to create fairness and balance in society, those programs will continue. Sorry, what adding?
I am not going to add anything on reservation, but on, what can change at education. So there are lots of things that we keep waiting for the government to change or the regulations to change. But when I look back, whichever institution I have been in, yes, there were things that were taught to us in class, but my greatest learning came from interacting with my fellow students. And therefore, and that is something that is completely in your own hand. I mean, the amount of time that you choose to spend with each other, do the projects with each other, because that is the greatest learning. And that is also why the selection process into an institute becomes important, because then you have people, because then you filter out people. And therefore, the quality of interaction among students also is good. So, my only advice is don't keep waiting for regulation to change, don't keep waiting for the education system to change. Spend more time in meaningful discussions amongst yourself, because believe me, your greatest learning for life will come from those.
Perfect. So I think that's been a very intriguing, very fascinating one. So we can take one last question. Yes, ma'am.
As far as I didn't know what TS was before, and now what I could understand, the objective of TS is to continue Tata's ideology, the philosophy and the values.
And also have good leaders leading businesses.
Yeah, sure. The one thing that I have a question regarding is, if we see Ratan Tata's and GRT's ideologies and philosophies regarding the future generation, can they adapt to the thinking of merging the social causes with the cause of business? As Ratan Tata and GRT are working on, since they've been working on that ideology and philosophy values itself, can the future generation adapt to it as of yet or not?
I think no better person than that.
So actually we make that point in the book that in many ways the new thinking about the role of the corporate in society, the modern standard of corporate responsibility, which values creation of value for all stakeholders, not just shareholders, is all actually in sync with what the Tatas have been doing for 150 years.
Right.
And that is actually a role model now for corporates going forward. So you need to have corporate purpose, you need to have a vision and mission that is based on fundamental values. You need to be focused on balancing the interests and creating long-term value for all your stakeholders. And that is exactly the direction which most corporates today will say they are headed. So I don't think Tata have to do anything differently, but many corporations can learn from the Tata experience.
Thank you, sir. And now, as we're humbled and graced with the presence of all our esteemed guests, it's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks for this occasion. Respected Ms. Sonu Bhasin ma'am, respected Dr. Mukund Rajan sir, respected Mr. Mohit Gupta sir, respected Dr. Ravikant Swami sir, respected Dr. Rashmi Khurana Nagpal ma'am, respected Dr. Purva Ranjan ma'am, all of my fellow coordinators for this event, my other faculty colleagues, staff members, and never the least but the most important, my dear students. I, on behalf of the entire DME fraternity, would like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all the dignitaries and all those present here, and for gracing the occasion with their valuable presence and time. This author talk has left us with more knowledge to contemplate upon. Thanking each one of you. I am grateful to all of you for being here for this author talk by our esteemed guests. Thank you so much. Now I would request the guests and the dignitaries here along with the EC coordinators to kindly assemble for a group photograph. Thank you.